When it comes to restoring old photographs, one of the biggest challenges that we face is the raw material that we're actually working with. Obviously, in many cases, older photographs are going to be faded or otherwise damaged, and we'll want to address those issues. But before we even get started with that, it's important to give yourself the best starting point possible. And that means working with the best source image possible. Obviously, if you had multiple copies of the same photo, you would choose the one that was in the best condition, but it's also important to choose the appropriate source. You want to start with the best original possible, and that means not just picking the best version if you have multiple copies of an image, for example, but that you start with the best source material. And that means using an original transparency if you're working with slides, a film negative, or even a glass plate for certain older images. The last option you'll want to consider is a photographic print, and that's because a print contains far less information than the original transparency, generally around 10% of that original information. Of course, in some cases, you'll only have the print as an option, and if that's your only option, then that's certainly what you're going to need to work with. But bear in mind, the better the original, the easier your process is going to be, and the better the quality of your final result. With an analog original, a print, a slide, or negative, you're going to need to get that into the computer, and that means scanning that original in a way that will give you optimal quality, the maximum amount of information with which to work. Whether you're scanning for yourself or sending your originals out to someone else to be scanned, it's important which settings are actually used for that scanning. To start with, you'll want to consider resolution. When we're scanning a transparency, a glass plate, a film negative, or a slide, you'll want to scan at the maximum optical resolution of the original. If you only have a print available, then I recommend scanning at around 600 pixels per inch. This particular image has a number of problems, including a problem related to resolution, so let's explore the various problems with this image so that we can get a better sense of what we'll actually want to do when scanning our originals that we plan to restore. I'll start off by choosing Image Size from the menu, and we can see that this is a relatively small image. It was scanned at 300 pixels per inch, and the original is apparently about 5 inches by 4 inches. That's a very small scan, and it's not going to give us very much information to work with. If this had been a print, then we would want to scan at around 600 pixels per inch, and if it was an original transparency, then we would want to scan at the maximum optical resolution of the scanner. And for many scanners, that ranges anywhere from around 2,000 pixels per inch for a flatbed scanner up to around 4,000 pixels per inch for a film scanner. But check the specifications for your scanner or the service provider that you're using to find out what that value is. Next, we'll want to consider the mode in which we are actually scanning. I'll go to the Image menu and choose Mode, and you can see that this image was scanned in a grayscale mode. And that makes a lot of sense because the original here is in fact grayscale. There's no color information in the original. However, I recommend scanning in the RGB color space. In most cases, that's not going to provide a huge advantage, and in fact it triples the size of your file, but it can be helpful for images that have any degree of color shift or fading because it means we're getting the maximum amount of information out of the original. We also want to consider the bit depth at which we're scanning, and you can see that this image was scanned in at 8 bits per channel. Whenever possible, I recommend scanning at 16 bits per channel because this gives us much smoother gradations in our scanned original, and that gives us much greater flexibility when we're optimizing the image. And that's especially important when it comes to working with old and faded images because it's quite likely that we're going to need to apply relatively strong adjustments to those images. Your scanner might not offer options that are referred to as 8 bits per channel or 16 bits per channel, and that's because very often scanners will refer to the final overall bit depth for an RGB image. An RGB image contains 3 channels, and therefore an 8-bit per channel scan would be referred to as a 24-bit scan, and a 16-bit per channel scan would be referred to as a 48-bit scan. Regardless, I recommend scanning at the highest bit depth offered by your scanner, and that's generally going to be 16 bits per channel or 48-bit. All of these considerations are aimed at making sure you have the maximum amount of high-quality information in your original scan, which will give you maximum flexibility and optimal quality in your final image.